Good evening, everyone. How y'all doing this evening? Everybody good? All right, all right. So my name is Loomis Joseph Elair, and I am the Associate Director of the Office of Academic Multicultural Initiatives, otherwise known as OAMI, here at the University of Michigan. I also have the esteemed honor of coordinating the MLK Symposium Planning Committee. And at this time, if there are any committee members in the audience, could you please stand? A few. Before we begin the program, I also want to recognize a small group of people who serve on the subcommittee, an outreach subcommittee. We have two student interns, Alex Swift and Chandani Wirspa. Can you please stand and be recognized? Thank you very much. And we also have Helen Look, who is with us from the University Library. Could you please stand and be recognized? And finally, but of course not least, my co-coordinator of the symposium and the person who puts up with a lot of my madness, Mary Taylor. Please be recognized. These folks have dedicated to making sure that we as a university do just a little bit more in terms of being engaged, in terms of students and faculty. This symposium is one of the largest in any university campus, but we also know that we could always do more. We can always have more engagement. And this small group of people have set out to ensure that we do this at the University of Michigan. So they have been working around the clock since last February to think about how can we be more creative in ensuring that students have more say in what the symposium looks like. And from 4 to 5 o'clock to this evening was an example of that, where Shaun King sat with a small group of students who have demonstrated a commitment to social justice on this campus, and he met with them and they had questions, and they decided that for them there were certain things that Shaun King could contribute to their work. So before Shaun is even before you all, he has already put in a good hour of work. So thank you for that, Shaun, in advance. As I said, I'm only here to welcome you, and right now we'll bring to the stage Austin McCoy, who I will give an introduction to, who will be our MC for the rest of the evening, if you will. He will give us an opening, and then he will also do the closing. Austin McCoy is a Mellon Humanities postdoctoral fellow. His research analyzes the development of left-wing politics and movements in the Midwest between 1967 and 1989. Austin's research and teachings interests include African American history, political economy, labor, social movements, and activism and hip-hop culture. Austin is also an organizer. He's worked on issues pertaining to racial justice on campus and police shootings in Ann Arbor. Austin helped organize a campus-wide overnight racial justice teach-in in 2014. He also tries to serve as a resource for undergraduate organizers on campus. He is a regular contributor for the academic blog Nursing Cleo, where he speaks about issues pertaining to race, gender, politics, and culture. He is definitely a committed member of this community and making sure that we all push forward towards justice. Please welcome Austin McCoy.
Thank you, Loomis, for the kind introduction. Like, one of the biggest fears besides tripping over your words is, what if I trip over the stairs coming up? So that's why I use the rail, like, just to make sure, like, all right, now I don't want to, like, trip and fall, go viral that way, right? So first, I want to welcome everyone to this event. And I also want to thank everyone who submitted questions beforehand. So there's not going to be any Q&A. Shaun has, we solicited questions from folks. Shaun has incorporated them into his presentation. So this should give him more time to give us his thoughts around some of these important issues. And I was, asked to talk about my own experiences of student activism real quick and the importance of it. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge some things. So the obvious thing I want to acknowledge first is Black Lives Matter. Black women's lives matter. And I say this because Ann Arbor police shot and killed a 40-year-old black woman. Her name was Aura Rosser. This transpired on November 9, 2014. Aura Rosser would have turned 43 years old this past Friday. So I wanted to make sure that we let folks know who are watching the live stream, some folks who might be rather skeptical about police shootings in Ann Arbor, we haven't forgotten it happens here. I also want to say another thing. Black queer lives matter. Black trans lives matter. And we also must recognize that we are gathered here on Native land, and we should remember that Native folks are more likely to be killed by the police. And one last thing for the skeptics. These are all facts. So when I was a student, I learned how to organize by participating in student activities. I took classes on the civil rights movement. And, I also learned how to, become an activist by doing, so organizing events, actions, and campaigns on and off campus. I consider myself a small D Democrat. I try my best to work in the tradition of Ella Baker, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Students for a Democratic Society. I try my best to help empower folks on the margins. And this also means assessing power relations in any given moment and making sure that the folks who are on the margins can be brought into the center of the political conversation. It also means connecting folks, making sure that folks know how to get involved. Shaun talked about how activists, we have a greater responsibility to create on-ramps onto the highway of justice, right? So it's our job to try to help folks get involved, help introduce folks, not just say, well, where were you, but we're glad you're here. I try to combine a radical analysis of my surroundings with participatory forms of decision-making with the goal of transforming institutions through democratizing them. Changing my surroundings through redistributing resources and power from the top to the bottom. That's pretty much my charge. Student activists here contribute to U of M's rich history of campus politics, from the establishment of the Students for a Democratic Society to the first Vietnam War teach-in in the 1960s to the various Black-led student movements, whether we're talking about the first Black Action Movement, to the hashtag Being Black at the University of Michigan, and to the Students for Justice at the University of Michigan. Yeah, go ahead and... So when folks come here, to participate, to come speak, this is the tradition that you're walking into. New students, faculty, and staff enter into a vibrant activist community where radical critique, protest, and democratizing institutions are the point of action. All of the recent activism of the last several years points to a more democratic university, and this is whether it's ensuring not just diversity, equity, and inclusion for underrepresented students, but pushing for racial justice, working for labor rights and economic justice, whether it's protecting the undocumented folks, Native folks, genderqueer folks, Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian students, faculty, and staff, making the campus more accessible to folks with visible and invisible disabilities, whether it's lowering tuition for everyone, eradicating sexual assault, harassment, and rape on campus, whether it's pushing university to divest from corporations that contribute to climate change, or whether it's pushing the university to divest from corporations that might invest in apartheid elsewhere. Campus activism here has always been about finding ways to build and implement the politics of the possible. This is what democracy looks like. So when students, faculty, and staff engage in campus activism, we learn that democracy isn't just about voting in elections, supporting either of the two established parties. It isn't even about creating safe spaces. It's about challenging ourselves to change institutions and put them on a path towards justice for everybody. It is about finding ways to work with the larger community. Campus activism and democracy is about coming together to exercise our political imaginations in a society that tells us social change can only come through voting red or blue. There are no alternative facts, right? Actually. But there are emancipatory, alternative political visions, and our job is to build these alternatives. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mary Taylor, and then we can get to the main event. Mary Taylor is a success coach and program coordinator in the Office of Academic and Multicultural Initiatives. She is also the assistant coordinator for the University of Michigan Martin Luther King Jr. Symposium. Mary's background includes youth leadership development, intercultural communication trainings, client advocacy, and diversity and inclusion workshop facilitation. While working full-time, Mary is studying to get her Master's of Art in Higher Education with a concentration in diversity and social justice here at the University of Michigan. As a student group advisor and mentor, Mary encourages students to continually develop their leadership and cross-cultural understanding to be effective change agents on campus and after graduation. Will you please give it up for Mary Taylor?
Good evening. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce our guest lecturer for the evening, Shaun King. Shaun King is one of many voices, though an increasingly prominent voice within the Black Lives Matter movement. By using social media to highlight, amplify, and discuss news of police brutality, racial discrimination, and other civil rights issues, King has become an indispensable source for extending crucial conversations about social justice and equality. Shaun King has written extensively about the Black Lives Matter movement, covering discrimination, police brutality, the prison industrial complex, and social justice in the wake of violence in New York, Baltimore, Cleveland, Ferguson, Missouri, Charleston, South Carolina, and other cities. He is senior justice writer at the New York Daily News, a regular political commentator for the Young Turks, the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and was justice writer for the Daily Kos. Widely known for using Twitter and Facebook to tell micro stories of injustice, King's social media updates have influenced how the world knows about those most affected by racism and police brutality. A strong advocate for families, Shaun has become an extremely visible fundraiser for victims of injustice. King is the author of The Power of 100 and has spent much of the past 15 years raising nearly $10 million for charities and causes across the globe. King is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Epoch Humanitarian Award and the Hometown Hero Award from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He was also included in MSNBC's The Griot Top 100 History Makers. On stage, he draws from his oratorical skills developed in part by the 15 years he spent as a local pastor. King also attended Morehouse College, a private, historically Black men's college in Atlanta, Georgia, where he majored in history. Everyone, please join me in welcoming husband, father, activist, and writer, Shaun King.
Hello, how are you? Good to see you. What's up, Michigan? I thought it was going to be cold, but y'all warmed it up a little bit. So good to see you. Thank you for coming out. I think a few of our cousins reserved tickets and didn't show up. And so maybe tweet your cousin and let them know to come on and join us. Good to be with you. It's my honor to be here. Thank you so much to all of the staff who helped organize it. Thank you for inviting me. It's my honor. This is my first time in Ann Arbor. First time. I've been to Detroit many times, but thanks for having me. It's always a great thing to be able to come and see you face to face. So many of you know me by my profile picture. That it's a bit of an outer body experience to see the profile picture, like walk and talk and move. Because you've seen me on Facebook and Twitter, some of you for months or years, but I do exist outside of those places, and so I'm always glad to see you all face to face. And if we end at a certain time, we're going to have like a selfie festival at the end of this. So we're just going to. Now, they told me we had like a ridiculously small amount of time to take several hundred selfies. So we have to figure out a way to do this efficiently, but there's another event that I have to do after this, and so we'll make it happen. But thank you for having me. It's my honor to be here. I want us to get started. You know, I'm here not necessarily to inspire you, because I believe in a lot of ways that you're already inspired. That you're frustrated, that you are angry, that there's still hope in you. For many of you, how many of you participated in the Women's March this weekend? Wow. My family participated. Even my mother, who's a 65-year-old retired woman, marched in Lexington, Kentucky. And so it was good to see, millions and millions of people in countries all over the world joined in. And, so I don't think you need me to inspire you. I don't even think that we need inspiration as people. Tonight I'm here to really teach you a lesson that I think will give you a new lens through which to see the world. And it's a lesson that I learned that has helped me immeasurably over the past few years. Also want to thank the women who are signing and doing closed captions tonight. Can you put your hands together for them as well? Thank you. Thank you both. It's a beautiful thing. So I did get some questions from some of you that submitted them online, and I'll try to integrate some of what I heard and thought that you were trying to get at. I'll try to integrate that into my presentation. But let's get right to it. Most people are shocked when they see a big, bearded, hairy, white guy at a Black Lives Matter presentation, but let me break it down and let me teach for a little bit. My first job out of college, I'm 37, so my first job out of college in 2001, I was a high school history and civics teacher. I majored in history and African American studies at Morehouse in Atlanta and taught for several years. It's strange because most of you who've only come to know me over the past few years only know me as somebody who is advocating against issues like police brutality. But I lived a full, rich life before you started following me on Twitter. Before you followed me, I was already married, I already have 5 kids. Like I existed before then. And it's important to know that, because I find myself, so much of who I was even 10 or 15 years ago, I find myself leaning on that now. I went to grad school for history as well. And I was taking a graduate history class in the spring of 2015. And I was still within the ad drop period. Do you all have the ad drop period? Are you still within the ad drop period? Okay, so I was within the ad drop period, but I was in a real funk. It was the spring of 2015 was a rough time for a lot of activists, actually. That previous semester, if you think of, and when you're a college student, and even now that I'm out of college, I still think of the world as operating as semesters, right? But in the fall of 2014, something really pivotal, a lot of pivotal moments happened in this country. In July of 2014, I was working at an environmental charity in Santa Monica in California. It was a really cushy, comfortable job. And it was something really new for me that was stretching me. I was director of communications for a charity called Global Green. And they do amazing work all over the world. And I got an email from a friend of mine. I think it was actually a Facebook message. And there's something weird that happens. People who you become friends with on Facebook during high school or college, no matter how much your life has changed, when you leave college, they will always know you as you were known as a college student. And so even though I was working at this environmental charity and doing very different work, anybody who knew me as a college student, I was really an activist as a student. I was student government president at Morehouse. Back then, in 1999, we led protests against the police murders of Amadou Diallo, who was shot 41 times on his doorstep. A brother named Shaun that same year, who was shot at 50 times by police just hours before his wedding. Both of them were unarmed, Shaun and Amadou Diallo. And so a friend of mine who still knew me, this was 15 years after I'd finished college, still knew me as Shaun the activist, emailed me and he said, "Man, there's something terrible on YouTube that you have to see." And this will tell you how much the world has changed over the past few years. He said, "Man, there's a video on YouTube, and there's a man, a grown man, and he said he looks like he's in his 40s, and he said the police are arguing with him about something, and he's trying to explain to the police that he hasn't done anything, that they're harassing him. Then all of a sudden, a police officer tackles him to the ground and chokes him to death." And I remember thinking, like, oh my God. At that point in my life, I had never seen a video like what he had just described. None of us had. No such video had ever been released. And he said, "Man, when you see the video," he said, "the guy is telling them over and over and over again, 'I can't breathe.'" And I had the thought, I'm amongst my coworkers. I had the thought, like, I don't even know if I want to click on this. Not only was I not sure that I wanted to see it, but I didn't know if I wanted to see it in front of everybody. So there was no one around. I clicked on it, and what I saw was Officer Daniel Pantaleo of the NYPD choking Eric Garner to death. And it shook me. You know, I could not have predicted what opening that email would have done to me. I could not let go of it. I learned over the next 2 days, the video had not gone viral yet. It literally only had a few thousand views on YouTube. I was so deeply disturbed by it, and I was so convinced, rightly so, that if I shared it, I was not nearly as known as I am today, but I had a pretty significant following already from the work I had been doing for most of my life. I said to myself, I'm going to share this video. I had an email list that I had built. I didn't have a public Facebook page, but I'm going to share it with my Facebook friends. And I had 20 or 30,000 people following me on Twitter. I'm going to share this. And my thought was, somebody is going to be arrested for what they did to this man. And that made a lot of sense, right? Because I found out in the following days that New York had banned chokeholds for over 10 years. And so my thought was, somebody will be held accountable. So for a couple of weeks, I became obsessed with this case. And I thought in my mind and in my heart, someone will be held responsible. It seemed like the right, reasonable thing to do. Just a few weeks later, Eric Garner was killed on July 17th of 2014. Just a few weeks later, I was literally writing a story about Eric Garner just on my Facebook page. I was not yet writing full-time for any outlets or anything like that. I was writing a story about Eric Garner, and a different friend of mine who lived in St. Louis texted me, and he described it like this to me. He said, "Shaun," he said, you have to see this. He said, "There's a neighborhood in St. Louis called Ferguson." And he said, "Right now, there's a kid in the middle of the street, and he's been shot to death, and there's blood flowing in the street. And I clicked on a live stream video link that he sent me. And Mike Brown had literally only been, had only died maybe about 2 hours before that. And the anger and the frustration and the outrage of people in the community was building and building. And I had the thought, oh my God, they're killing folk every 2 or 3 weeks. That's what I thought. And then the next day I learned that police had shot and killed a young brother at a Walmart in Ohio, and that he was on the phone with his girlfriend just talking about life in the pet food section, and somebody had lied and called police and said that a man named John Crawford had a gun and was pointing it at people, which never happened. And police came in thinking they were in some wild hostage scenario, and they shot and killed John Crawford. And I started to realize, like a lot of you started to realize, wow, this is not happening every 2 or 3 weeks. It's not even happening every 2 or 3 days. But that police in our country shoot and kill people about every 8 hours. And none of us, very few of us, understood the extent of that. About 2 months later, we learned in Ohio that police shot and killed a young boy at a playground who was playing just a block away from his home. He was there with his sister, and his name was Tamir Rice. And so for July and August and September and October and November of 2014, the whole world came to know about injustice in America. And all around the country and around the world, we marched, we protested, we tweeted, we Facebooked, we wrote, we did creative art, we did walkouts, we did die-ins, and we did it all with the thought someone's going to be held responsible. Only to finally get the news that nobody would be held responsible. Not for what they did to Eric Garner, not for what they did to Mike Brown, not for what they did to John Crawford, not for what they did to Tamir Rice or Rekia Boyd or anyone else. That not a single officer was held responsible that year for any incident. And so in the spring of 2015, I'm enrolled in this class called the Introduction to Historiography. And I already knew it was going to be a really boring class. I'm so sorry if my professor sees this, because I'll compliment it here in a second. But I already knew it was going to be a really boring class, and but it was mandatory. And I started taking the class. I was already in like a funk emotionally, and which is not my way. I'm an incredibly optimistic person. And so I started taking the class, and like 2 sessions in, I realized this is going to be as bad as I thought it was. And so I did what any reasonable student does. I went to the registration website, and I saw I was still like barely within the add drop period. And I saw what other classes were available, and the only thing that was left was like advanced badminton and like swimming 5 or something. You know, there was nothing relevant to the program that I was in. By that time, every inspirational professor, all their classes are full. And so I made up in my mind, like, okay, I'm not just going to drop it. Note to students, it's never smart to drop classes when you've taken student loans out for those classes. You still pay for that, right? Your refund may be bigger, but you will get a bill in the mail for that class. And so I registered for it, and I stayed registered, and I started taking it. And it wasn't that I made a smart decision, but staying in that class ended up being one of the best things I'd ever done. So the professor was teaching us about the man who is on the screen now, and a lot of people call him the father of the study of history. His name is Leopold von Ranke. And the lesson that I'll be teaching you today is a lesson directly from his life, and that lesson has impacted the way I see injustice, the way I see our country and see the world, the way I see it going, the direction, the trajectory that we're on, and I hope to leave you with that tool because I think it will be instructive for where we go. So Leopold von Ranke is seen as the father of the study of history. Before von Ranke, you really could not major in history. People told stories of history, but history as an academic discipline had not really been pioneered yet. There was no track to become a doctor of history. It was seen as, at the very best, a small niche. But this academic discipline of history had not been created. He built it. And he built it in great part from something that took him a huge part of his professional life to do. He sought out to create, in essence, what was one of the first timelines of human history. Now that sounds simple today because obviously timelines already exist, or we could Google, or we could research, or we would have access to endless information in libraries. But in the 1850s when he was doing this, each country, if you lived in a particular country, each country often had very little understanding of what was going on outside of that country. History was very nationalistic. And so he sought out to create, in essence, a brain dump of every hero, every villain. I imagine it looks something like this. This is, now, let me see if this works here. There's rerun from What's Happening right there. Now, some of you don't know. When you get time later, don't do it now. When you get time, go to YouTube and search rerun, What's Happening, and you have to put dance. Rerun, What's Happening, dance. Is anybody here brave enough to do a demonstration? Sometimes, I never know, sometimes people just have courage like that. But there's somebody here who knows how to do it, but you're just not. All right. I was going to have a prize for somebody, but all right. Do you know it?
I left my red beret in the
Oh,
car.
if you know it, you just don't have your hat, huh? So, obviously when von Ranke did it, obviously rerun from What's Happening was not on his timeline. But he did literally, it took him almost 35 years to create a repository of thousands and thousands and thousands of books, of materials, of source materials, of every hero, every villain, every inventor, every leader, as best as he could at the time with the information that he had access to. And it was not hundreds, not thousands, but it was tens of thousands of figures. And as he did it, he saw something that troubled him, and it's that I want to talk about, because what troubled him still troubled me. And as I learned what he saw, I realized that very little had changed. As he studied the arc of human history, what he saw was most people in his era, and they still believe it today, most people believe that human beings are steadily improving, right? That the way most people view human history, I could say it like this, if you don't mind, that here is 1500 and 1600 and 1700 and 18 and 19, the 2000s and beyond, that most people believe then and still believe now that humanity is on a steady progression, that we're doing it a little better than the people who came before us, who are doing it a little better than the people who came before us, who did it a little better than the people who came before them. And for the most part, in the early 1800s, there was very little to debunk that. But as Leopold von Ranke began to lay out all of human history in a timeline that looked something like this, that's a timeline of the history of London. As he started going back to the beginning of humanity until where he was, he saw that humanity actually looked more like this. That sometimes human beings are amazing and cooperative and collaborative and sweet and peaceful and every other happy adjective that we could think of. And what he found is that sometimes human beings are amazing and sometimes they're not. That humanity, if I go back, humanity is not this steady, inclining progression where people are just getting better and better and better and better, that instead humanity is a series of peaks and valleys. As he began to create this timeline, it was his life's work. As he began to create this timeline, he saw that there were highs and lows in humanity, that it was not this steady incline, that sometimes people were peaceful and sometimes they were at war. Sometimes there were battles that were just, and sometimes there's genocide. And as he saw it, he struggled to make sense of it because the prevailing sentiment among people, and psychologists and psychiatrists still write about it to this day, the prevailing sentiment among us is that we are getting better. Psychologists say that there's something in us that wants to believe we're getting better. There is something depressing about the thought that we're not improving, that this generation is not getting it better. There's something in us that desperately wants to believe that we had our shot at humanity and we tweaked it and improved it and it got better. But what he found was that people were confusing the steady improvement of technology with the steady improvement of humanity. And if we apply this timeline to technology, say this is a timeline of transportation, and say the first bar is the invention of the automobile. And then we see the automobile get better and better and better and more efficient and more effective and better and better and better. Or say this is flight. Okay, you go from early flight and you see it evolve and evolve and evolve to the point that this morning I got on a plane from New York and I was here 90 minutes later. A trip that at one time would take people weeks and weeks to walk or do it on horseback, or at least hours and hours, a full day by a car, I can now do in 90 minutes. He was thinking more about the refrigeration of food. And he saw food that used to spoil almost immediately. They were coming up with creative ways to preserve food. He was thinking about medicine and surgeries and how for the first time, imagine, they were finding ways to put people to sleep while they performed surgeries, because for most of human history, whatever happened to you, you would have to be wide awake working through that problem, whatever it was. And so he said, people are confusing the steady progression of technology with the steady progression of humanity. Now, if this is true with technology, and I believe it's true, I cannot explain the Galaxy Note 7. I don't know where the Galaxy Note 7, every time I get on the airplane, they're like, if you have one, please give it to us. And it's like, I could imagine, like, I've never seen anybody actually give it to anybody. I guess you just like keep it in your bag in shame, you know. But it's still like blowing up in people's pockets and burning holes in their jeans. So sometimes there are outliers, even in the steady progress of technology. But he was right that technology, and you could apply this to anything, be it cell phones. I speak to such young audiences. How many of you in this room are still teenagers? Teenagers in the room. There was a time, this will freak you out, there was a time where phones were tied to the wall. You probably don't remember, but it was like a big chunk of my childhood. There was a phone and a little squiggly cord. And this will really freak you out. There were no cell phones. Like when I tell my kids, I have 5 kids from preschool to high school, and they don't know life with a phone tied to the wall. Like growing up in my house, there was no way to have a private conversation with your girlfriend. Like, if you had a conversation with your girlfriend, your mother was right there And the worst off, you knew her mother was right there. And so, like, just think of telephones. Or do you remember the cordless phone? And for a long time, some of you, you're too young, that you would have to pull this long metal thing out. And do you remember when it would break? And then you would just have to have your cordless phone without the antenna. I mean, that's like, and now, like, I have not had a home phone in years. Like, I haven't had a home phone in probably 10 years. I've just used my cell phone. Like, I don't even know why they even put home phone on applications or anything anymore, because so few people have them. And so it is true, there's this steady progress of technology. And even back then, Leopold von Ranke was wise enough to know that people were confusing the steady progress of technology with the steady progress of humanity. Humanity looks more like this. Because here's the thing. If this is true, okay, you invited me, so I'm just going to speak my mind, okay? If this is true, you can feel free to disagree with me, but if this is true with humanity, and we are right here on the tip of this, if this is today's date, that means that Donald Trump is peak humanity. I don't even think conservatives believe that. I have facts for that, because his approval rating is now significantly below the number of people who actually voted for him. Like, if this is true, if humanity is steadily progressing, I ask very seriously, how do we explain Donald Trump? He does not, either he is the Galaxy Note 7, right? Or maybe, that's possible. Either he is the Galaxy Note 7, which is a possibility, or this is true. That here we are, and hear me, I'm not saying here's Barack Obama, here's Donald Trump, right? You can say that. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that humanity is not this linear progression. It's a series of peaks and valleys. And if this is true, let me break it down in another way. If this is true, how is this true? For those of you in the back, this is not an artist's rendering, but an actual diagram that was created during the transatlantic slave trade to help people whose profession it was to pack human beings onto ships, to determine down to the square inch how many human beings they could fit on the ships. See, here's the thing. If this is true, how is this true? Let me break it down even differently. If this corner right here is the first human being right here, and this is us right here, the first humans and us, in the scheme of human history, this right here is about right there. Okay? If this is a timeline of all of human history from the beginning until right this moment, the transatlantic slave trade is not here or here or here or here. The transatlantic slave trade is about right here in the middle of this bar. In the scheme of all of human history, it's modern. If this is true, how is this true? How is it true that for hundreds and hundreds of years, not thousands, not millions, but tens of millions of people were bought and sold as property? How is he true? How is, if this is true, how are these wounds on his back true? Because they are definitely true. As we make a laughing reference to alternative facts, what I'm trying to tell you is that either this is true or this is true. But humanity cannot steadily be getting better and that be true, and him be true. If this is true, how are they true? Because they are definitely true. That definitely happened. Millions and millions and millions of people, again, ripped from their homes, forced into camps, either starved to death or killed. And in a lot of audiences where I speak, there are still men and women who were alive when this happened. There are men and women who experienced this and were some of the rare humans to survive it, and they're still alive. If this is true, how are these shoes true? This is at a museum in Auschwitz where it's tens of thousands of shoes. The men and the women and the children were forced to take their shoes off upon admission into the camps. If this is true, how's this true? This is Rwandan genocide. Almost all of us in the room were alive when this happened. Some of you were babies, but it happened on our watch. How are these true? This is at a Rwandan genocide museum. See, these are definitely true, but if this is true, how are they true? Because this took place, almost right here. And if humanity is steadily getting better, how do we explain Rwandan genocide? And the explanation is that this is not true. It's at the root of what Leopold von Ranke began to understand is that, yes, as cool as it is, technology is steadily getting better, good for us, but that humanity looks a lot more like this. This is humanity. That humanity has peaks and valleys, highs and lows. And a lot of what perplexes people is that we want to believe this is true. I did a study about 6 months ago. Donald Trump had not yet been elected. And there were some really, really ugly things going on in his campaign and with police brutality in the country. It was an awful time. You will remember in a span of about a week, first we learned of Alton Sterling, who was shot and killed by police in Baton Rouge. He was like the local CD seller in front of a convenience store there in Baton Rouge. And I met his family. I spoke at LSU and met his family last week. And the nation was furious as we saw horrendous videos of what happened to Alton Sterling. As we see him on the ground and police literally get a gun and shoot him repeatedly while he's on the ground. And in the fallout over what happened to Alton Sterling, we then see something horrendous happen to Philando Castile in Minnesota. And I remember when that first happened, someone contacted me. It must have been just 10 minutes after he was shot, and they sent me the video. Someone lived in the community where he lived, and his fiancee live streamed it. It was all that she knew to do. Because what do you call who do you call? She's in the car with her baby and the love of her life. Philando was an amazing man. They have a memorial to him at the school where he was the head of all food services, that parents and teachers there loved him and said he had memorized every student's name in the school and called them by name every day. He had literally like the cheesy cafeteria guy photo in the yearbook. Like he was that guy. He was like that dude. And they sent me the video. Wired magazine just did a story, and it was a cover story, and you should see it. If you Google Wired magazine, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, it'll come up because they interviewed me and the activist and his family. And when I first saw it, I thought, very seriously, I thought I was looking at a movie set. It was my first, it's if it was introduced to you as someone was just killed, you'd see it very differently. But a stranger sent it to me and told me nothing. And when I clicked on it, I saw a woman who was so calm. And I could not make, I don't know, I thought she was a bad actress. Because I just didn't know what I was looking at. And I saw a man bleeding out, struggling to breathe, gasping for breath. And I saw this peaceful woman. And I was like, what in the hell am I looking at? Like, I literally did not understand it. And as I started to look and look, I realized that her daughter was in the back seat, and there was a man pointing a gun at her. And then an officer had just fired 6 shots into the car of a man who did nothing, and she's just trying to talk her way through survival. And the whole nation began to protest again, and there were marches. I don't know what happened here in Ann Arbor or Detroit, but there were marches all around the country. And then a few days later, it was terrible. A few days later, a man in Dallas, particularly the man was not mentally ill, and the man, while he was a veteran, he did not have PTSD. He was not a combat veteran. The man was so frustrated by police brutality, he was a veteran, got his gun and began killing police in Dallas. And a few days later, another veteran shot and killed police in Baton Rouge. And I remember thinking, like, this is not true. And I heard a phrase, and I did a study on that phrase. And here was the phrase, and tell me if you've heard this phrase. The phrase I heard was, it feels like we're in the 1960s. Have you ever heard that phrase? And over a period of about a month, because at the same time, Donald Trump was saying the ugly stuff that he says. White supremacists were literally showing up at his rallies and his events. And I Googled that phrase in variations of it where people would say, they would say something like, what is this, the 60s? Here's what they were saying. They didn't, I don't even think they fully understood it. What they were saying is, I thought this was the 40s, and this was the 60s, and this was the 80s, and this was the 2000s. And what the people were saying is, I thought humanity was a linear progression, but here I am in 2016, so why does it feel like I'm back here? They didn't say it like that, but when they say, what is this, the 60s? What they're saying is, I thought we were better than that. And for months, maybe years, we have walked around deeply confused at what we are experiencing, because what we are experiencing doesn't feel like the way we thought 2016 and 2017 were supposed to feel. So we've been struggling with our feelings, saying things that should be true. What is this, the 60s? Because we thought we had evolved past that. This is humanity. Last year, 102 fully unarmed black men, women, and children were shot and killed by police in this country. 102. And that number doesn't have an impact as much as names of people. Right? Doesn't impact you as much as stories of people. And then others say, well, I don't even know, is that a lot? Does anyone know who this is? It's a president, the 25th president. Somebody say it. Just take a guess. It's one of those. McKinley or Harding. You're warm. You're warm. Does anybody want to? No, it's either Harding or McKinley. Who's positive that it's McKinley? How do you know?
I know the order of the presidents by heart. I can name them in a list.
I need to see that later. Just show me later. So, you have to go back to 1902 to when he is president to find the last year in this country where 102 or more African Americans were lynched in this nation. So last year, I'm talking about unarmed, fully unarmed, no knives, no guns, no scissors, no bats, Not even, there was a man killed last year with a spoon. Okay, not even him. 102 unarmed. That we would have to go back to 1902 to find the last year in this country where 102 or more African Americans were lynched. See, most of us, we think the worst periods of lynching were in the 40s, 50s, or 60s. But in those years averaged 2 to 4 people per year. The worst years of lynching are in the 1890s and in the first years of the 1900s. But last year, more unarmed people who had not been tried by a jury of their peers, had not been convicted of crimes, were killed by someone who acted as judge, jury, and executioner. That's what lynching is. That the deadliest hate crime against African Americans did not take place in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, but was when Dylan Roof walked into a Charleston church. He was just convicted. That the deadliest hate crime against African Americans did not take place during the Civil Rights Movement, but took place last year on our watch. I say it like this. It's hard to understand a moment in history when you're in it. It's hard to understand an era, a time that you're in when you're in it, because you're just in it. You're just living your life. Like today, when you wake up, when you are on your way here, you're not reflecting over where am I in the scheme of human history. You're just living your life. We're thinking about the ad drop period. We're thinking about financial aid. Right? We're thinking about what will Donald Trump say or do. But we're not thinking about where we are in the scheme of history, but we're in a deeply problematic period in the history of this nation. Deeply problematic. If this is true, how is this true? If this is true, how is this true? This is the United States state and federal prison population up until 2014. And that does not include local jails, which have an additional 1 million people in them. If humanity, see, here's the thing. Either that's true or this is true. This is definitely true. These are facts. These are statistics. These are people who are currently incarcerated. That what we see here, and this chart goes back to 1925, but it could really go back to the founding of this nation, that for all of American history, our prison population was steady. If you look at 1925, 30, through the 1950s, 60s, 70s. How many of you have a Netflix account? You have a Netflix account? If you don't, you should borrow the password from your neighbor. Netflix doesn't really trip on that yet. They don't trip on that yet, so. And you have to watch 13th. You have to see it. You haven't seen it, watch it tonight. Like, stay up and watch it tonight. The documentary 13th, produced by Ava DuVernay. It could also, she called it 13th, but she could have called it The New Jim Crow. And The New Jim Crow is an essential must-read book by Dr. Michelle Alexander. And she is she's a primary voice in the documentary as well, and you'll see her throughout the documentary. And in her book and in the documentary, what they show us is that right about the 1970s, during the Nixon administration, and this is not speculation or theory, but they include in the book and in the documentary the source documents and the audio recordings, that the Nixon administration, in essence, just asked the question, how could they criminalize blackness without actually saying so? Like, this is the question they were trying to answer. And so what you see is a 2,000% explosion, not in crime, but in incarceration. This could never be an accident. And I want to push that thought because a lot of us, our words matter. And I hear people all the time say, our justice system is broken. And what 13th and New Jim Crow, and there's also a book called Slavery by Another Name that won the Pulitzer Prize. What they tell us is that this system is not broken, but it was built to function this way. This is not an accident. So if it was broken, that would assume that it was well designed and well intentioned, and it has somehow deviated from its design. But it is functioning exactly the way it was designed to work. It was meant to do that. Alton Sterling and Philando Castile and Mike Brown and Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland, they were all victims of this theory. You should Google, it's an article that I quote all the time. It's in the Washington Post, but it's based on a study that was done. If you Google the words, United States drug arrest, black, white, Washington Post, it'll come up. And what the article and the study shows is that even though the stereotype of a drug dealer in America is a young black man in a hoodie, that every single study after study after study shows that white people in this country not only use drugs at the same or higher rates, but sell drugs at the same or higher rates. But African Americans are prosecuted 800% more. So, when you see what happened to Eric Garner, no one should have ever put their hands on him. What he did not warrant ever being touched. It's under dispute. People allege that maybe he was selling single cigarettes. They call them Lucy's. Maybe he was doing, we don't even know. Police were called there for a fight, and people who were there all said he tried to break it up. He did not participate in it. He was a grown man, a father, a grandfather. Should Sandra Bland should she have really gone to jail in the first place? If you hear the audio recording of the police officer who pulled over Philando Castile, and when I saw it, it broke me. And I met his family in St. Paul, Minnesota earlier this year. It broke my heart to find out that over a period of about 10 years, he had been pulled over almost 90 times. 90 times by police there. And you can hear the audio dispatch recording of the officer who pulled him over. And on the dispatch, this is a man driving the car on the 4th of July with his fiancée and her daughter in the car going to a 4th of July celebration. And the officer says, he has a wide nose like a man I saw in an armed robbery video. How well do you have to know a man's nose to see a man in a passing car? He should have never been pulled over. This is on purpose. This is not an accident. If this is true, how is this true? This is international rates of imprisonment in the world. In 13th and in the New Jim Crow, you'll learn, and it's a stat we quote a lot, but I'm going to quote another one. In that you will often hear that we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. But not only do we have more people in prison than any country in the world, we currently have more people in prison than any country in the history of the world. And it's an old world, right? It's been around for a very long time. And when you are doing something worse than it has ever been done in the history of the world, it says a lot about you. We live in that time right now. That right now the United States incarcerates a higher percentage of African Americans than South Africa did at the height of apartheid. Here's the thing though. If we lined up 100 people, conservatives and Democrats, liberals, progressives, Democrats, Republicans, everybody, and lined them up and asked 100 of them, how many of you would say apartheid is evil? 99 of them, except the Dylan Roofs of the world, 99 of them would say apartheid was evil. But if you line that same 100 people up and ask them, well, what about this system, the United States of America? Is it evil? Oh, no. Most of the Democrats and progressives would not call it evil. The conservatives and Republicans damn sure would not. But when we compare stats for stats and see that more people, a higher percentage and a higher total, are incarcerated right now in this country than any country in the history of the world, I have to ask, is that true? Because if that's true, this is not true. And if this is true, that can't be true. This can't be true. Here's another way to look at it. If this is true, I want to show you something. This can't be true. Let me pause this and explain to you what's happening. This is in McKinney, Texas. Now, I don't know, it gets warm up here in the summer, right? Do you all they have swimming pools around here, right? Well, in McKinney, Texas, they have neighborhoods with what they call clubhouses and swimming pools, and you pay monthly dues for them. And these kids, most of who you can see, and I'll show to you, many of them lived in the neighborhood. These are babies. They are in 8th and 9th grade, very young kids, boys and girls. And they were having a pool party at their local neighborhood pool, not a community pool, but a pool that belonged to homeowners in the neighborhood. And many of them had parents who were homeowners. It's a wealthy, affluent neighborhood outside of Dallas. Some white folk at the pool saw the black kids at the pool, did not recognize them, called the police. Police show up. There are white kids who are also at the pool party, good kids, including the young white boy who was filming this, who was very brave to put himself there. And later in the video, I will not show it all, he begins to be stumped at why all of his friends are being manhandled and he is not. He is starting to have the realization, he is starting to realize that he is protected, in essence, by an invisible force field of his race. He's a very woke, conscious young man, and he's filming it. Police show up, this officer, and he immediately begins, I want to be particularly clear. These kids were not smoking at the pool. They were not smoking cigarettes or weed. They were not drinking alcohol at the pool. They were not touching each other inappropriately or having sex at the pool. Most of the kids were not even swimming. And if you know anything about the complicated history of black folk and swimming and girls' hair, like a few of the girls were, doing, if you see, it's a lot of dry folk, right? They were just hanging out. It was just kids, 8th or 9th graders wanting to be with each other on a hot summer day. But because of the way our system has worked, it was treated as a criminal behavior. And the officer comes and immediately begins throwing young boys on the ground and telling them to put their hands behind their back. And for some weird reason, he becomes fixated on this one young girl. She's 14 years old. She's in a 2-piece bathing suit. And I want to point out 2 people, and then we'll go to the next video. He's pulled his gun out. These two young boys, I love these 2 young brothers right here. They're friends with the young girl. And they see their friend being brutalized. What he was doing to her was wrong. I don't care what you say. She had no weapon. She broke no law. What he was doing to her, he would never do. Not only would he never do it to his daughter, he would never do it to anyone who looked like his daughter. Right? He did it to a girl he thought he could do it to. And I won't even unpack the complicated sexuality of what's going on there, but there's something deeper and uglier about the way he was violating it, right? And so he's manhandling her and throwing her around. Eventually, talking about the complicated sexuality, what's going on, eventually he mounts her and is on top of her and is like pushing her head into the ground. There's a lot of intergenerational deep stuff going on there. And the young boys see it and think like a young man should think, and they get the idea that they're going to go up and snatch her out. And I'm saying it in slow motion, but all of this, as you saw, it unfolded very quickly. And as soon as they try to snatch her, he pulls his pistol out. I mean, he was this close to shooting these young men. So I wanted to highlight those young men, but there's one other person that I want to highlight. I want to talk about it. Who's this man? I want to talk about him. He continues to inject himself into the scene, right? But he feels safer than anybody else there. He has in essence deputized himself. I say that very seriously. He has deputized himself. He has made himself an assistant deputy to the officers. Several times he begins putting his body weight on her. What has she done? What law has she broken? Is she a flight risk? What crime does she commit? Like, when we talk about, and I get it, when we talk about white privilege without context, a lot of white folk hear it and don't understand what we're talking about. Because here's the thing, a full half of my family are white working class people. And when they look at the world, and the world is still hard for them, they're like, what privilege are you talking about? That's white privilege, right? This is white privilege. And it's not an indictment. It's not an indictment, it's an observation. We did not create the system, it's real. If we're experiencing a linear progression of history, how is this true? How is this true? This is in Columbia, South Carolina. Do you remember when this happened? I came to know this young lady and her family and her attorney, and her attorney is actually the Speaker of the House in South Carolina and was best friends with the pastor of Emmanuel AME in Charleston, to show you how small the world is. And there were so many lies told about this story. And we're in this weird zone where white supremacists will invade a space and create fake stories and fake narratives. She is a foster child. She was in the class, and she had her cell phone. She had her cell phone out in class. How many of you are teachers or are training to be teachers? The teacher made a grave mistake. He told her to put her phone up, and she put her phone up. But then he changed his mind and said, no, give me your phone. He, in essence, created a conflict where there was no conflict. At that moment, people started lying and saying she blew up, she had attitude. They were basically playing on stereotypes of young black women. None of that happened. She froze up and went almost catatonic. She literally, from the moment he said, give me your phone, she literally never said another word. He called the principal, who called the police. Who we saw right there was Officer Ben Fields. He's the strength and conditioning coach for the high school football team. If you Google right now, or if you go to YouTube, there are videos, which he has still not deleted because he wants you to see them, I suppose. Ben Fields weightlifting. He's the type of guy that would post videos of himself lifting weights on YouTube. And just to give you context, he set several powerlifting records when he was a student at that school. When we see him in the classroom, he has been in there for all of 5 seconds. He literally doesn't even grab her out of the desk. He grabs her and rips her through the desk and throws her about 6 feet and arrests her right there. And then he arrests the young lady who filmed it. And after this happened, I lived in Atlanta at the time. I had several elders from the civil rights movement reach out to me and tell me, and they could not quite make sense of it. They told me that throughout the civil rights movement, they never knew a time where a young lady was assaulted by police in the school. No telling what could happen out of the school. There was always harassment that took place in the school. But they had never seen someone, a young lady no less, be brutalized in the school. And what a lot of the leaders were trying to work out with me, I'm talking about people who are in their 70s and 80s, what stumped them was that they too thought we had progressed past something, only to find out that we had not progressed past it, but that we were living in it. How is this true? You see that red hat? What do you think that says on it? What? Make America Great Again. That man is Matthew Heimbach. And before this video was ever filmed, and I came to know this young lady, she literally emailed me, because she also has her phone out. She emailed me that very day. I'm from Kentucky, and she goes to school at the University of Louisville. She's a junior. Brilliant, brilliant young lady. And none of us knew who Matthew Heimbach is, the man, the red hat, a well-known white supremacist who attended Donald Trump rallies all over the country and came there literally to pass out information and recruit people. You could Google his name. He's listed by several hate organizations as a well-known, dangerous white supremacist. Donald Trump himself and others saw this young lady and believed that she was a protester, but she was not. She was so smart. This was in the primary. She was so smart. She thought back then that Donald Trump could become president. And she just wanted to go to one of these events and see it for herself. She wanted to understand what the hype was about. She wanted to feel it and experience it. And she had in her mind she was going to go there and be peaceful and just be an observer. People began to harass her, which she filmed, including a man that I will show you next. And Donald Trump himself began telling the men to get her out. You can hear Donald Trump in another audio of it. And so the men began pushing her and shoving her. You see this man? I wrote the first article about this story, and I wrote an article, he's a veteran. And I wrote an article describing him as a veteran. And about 2 days later, I had someone from the Army call me and say, we need you to correct something. This man is not a veteran. Are there any veterans in the room? This man is not a veteran. He just dresses like veterans. That he loved the way it felt. As you could imagine, at an event like this, a Donald Trump rally, you could imagine being a senior citizen. People are assuming he fought in a long ago war. And they were giving him great deference and respect. And the military wanted me to know, that in essence, as funny as it sounds, he's like, this is like cosplay for him. This is a costume. So he's dressed like a veteran, with his veteran shirt and his veteran hat. He's yelling at her. This is in North Carolina. This brother actually was a protester, and he was being put out of the event. Here's what I want to show you. What do you think these brown shirts are? Who are these people in brown shirts? Those are police. Those are police. Armed police. There's one, there's two, three, four, and there's more up here, 6. So he's being escorted out of the arena. Let me get it back from the beginning. Do you see the police? They're looking at it. They see it. I want to unpack it because we saw it and we said it was terrible, but I want to unpack it. There's not a black man in America. Well, I was going to say there's not a black man in America who would elbow somebody like that, but that's not true. I know a few guys. But there's not a black man in America who in front of 6 police officers will go elbow a man in the face, and he literally cut him right on his orbital bone, and then go back to his seat. Doesn't exist. And so I want to unpack it because it looks simple, but it's complicated. did someone tell him he could do that? Or did he just have the deep understanding of decade after decade in America, in North Carolina, which in some ways has become our modern day Mississippi? Did he just had the life experience, it appears, of knowing when I do what I'm feeling like doing, I'm going to do it and go back to my seat. It's complicated. And then after he did it, he then did an interview.
Did you like the event?
You bet I liked it.
Yeah?
Listen.
What'd you like about it?
Knocking the hell out of that big mouth. We don't know who he is, but we know he's not acting like an American.
So you deserved it?
Every bit of it.
What was that?
Yes, he deserved it. The next time we see him, we might have to kill him.
If a black man is going to throw a bow in somebody's face and then happens to get away with it, I promise you he will not then do an interview on Inside Edition. Right? I'm just saying, I'm just keeping it all the way real. Like if by the grace of God, police find you invisible for a few moments of your life, for the first time in your life, they see you throw the elbow, they see the man collapse, and for some weird reason, like a Harry Potter cloak is over you, you go back to your seat. You would either vomit from the nausea of the weirdness of the moment, you would definitely know, I have just gotten away with the crime of my life. And you would not go on Inside Edition and then say that it was the highlight of your moment at the Donald Trump rally, which is what he said. He said it was the highlight of the event. And then if you see the man again, you might have to kill him. Why wouldn't you do that? Because you would know good and well that there'd be police waiting for you right outside of the stadium. We had to push for weeks and weeks, one, to find this man's identity. And then we had to put a ridiculous amount of pressure on them to finally arrest him. And when they arrested him, they then dropped the charges. He spent no time in jail because of it and apologized. He apologized. I have friends right now in jail and prison for crimes much less than that. And here's what I'm saying. If this, let me go all the way back. If this is true, how is this true? How is that true? And that, and this, and that. It's not true. That linear progression is not true. Here's where we are. We are in a dip in the quality of humanity in this country. And I need you to understand the dip. Harriet Tubman, she described the dip like this. She said, I'm paraphrasing Harriet Tubman, she said, in my life, I freed thousands of slaves. And she said, I would have freed thousands more had they only known they were slaves. In essence, listen, no, I'm not calling you a slave. I respect you more than that. What she is in essence saying is, I lived in the dip. And when I was in the dip, I freed people from the dip. And I would have freed thousands of more people had they only known they were in the dip. See, I came here to teach you this lesson of how Leopold von Ranke viewed history, how it's not this linear progression, that it's a series of highs and lows, of peaks and valleys. To educate you to the reality that right now we are in a deep dip in the quality of humanity. Because if you don't fully accept where we are, you will not embrace what the world will require of you to help get us out of the dip. Here's what frightens me. Dips can last for years or decades or centuries. The transatlantic slave trade did not last for a few years or a few decades, but it was a dip that lasted for hundreds of years. And if you recall the basics of human history, if you recall what it took to get us out of that dip, it was severe. that if you think, and this is part of what we are experiencing right now, some Americans think we're here. The billionaire class, they feel like they're here. But then there are a lot of us here. And while this arrow points here, I think it's more likely that we're here. And we're on our way here. It's true. It's painfully true. I could lie to you and say I felt otherwise. It's one thing to experience candidate Donald Trump. It's another thing to experience President-elect Donald Trump, who made no adjustments at all in his ethics or morality or integrity. It's a completely different thing to see President Donald Trump with the power of the Oval Office, overseeing the Justice Department, overseeing the FBI and the CIA. We're in the dip. Now, I had someone create this, but I created the next one, and you'll see a drastic drop in skill. You laughed a little too hard there, a little too hard. Let me explain it to you a different way, okay? And I'll close with this illustration. That when there is an introduction of an innovation, follow me, that affects the dominant power structure, there's always a dip in response. So let me give you 3 examples. When there's an introduction of an innovation, there's always a dip in the quality of humanity in response. This introduction, say this is slavery. The introduction of the innovation would be the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, I've studied lynching. There's very little lynching during slavery. There are very few instances documented or even alluded to. Why do you think that is? It's property. I heard it. It's property. You don't lynch people you need. You don't lynch people who you expect productivity from. You don't lynch an investment. So, there was an introduction of an innovation. The innovation was the end of slavery as we knew it. Guess what happened in response to that innovation? The KKK was formed, and the worst period of lynching in the history of this country followed. Here's another one. This is the Civil Rights Movement. In 1964, 1965, there's the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's an introduction of an innovation. Guess what happened in response to that? Mass incarceration. There was no mass incarceration until the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. Here's the most recent one. I'll tell you what's deeply innovative. We can disagree with his politics, but it's deeply innovative. There are 43 white presidents. You know what's really innovative? A black one. Deeply innovative. A black one. A black man named, see, it's common now, but a black man named Barack Hussein Obama. It was a deep innovation to our country. If you see now, for in perpetuity, when they show the pictures of presidents, there's white man after white man after white man after white man, he's memorized them. And then there's a brown man right there at the end named Barack Obama. Guess what? The dip, there is no Donald Trump. There's an introduction of an innovation. If this right here, instead of Barack Obama, say there was no innovation, and say it had been Al Gore, who was elected, say he was elected president in 2000 and reelected in 2008, and say John Kerry was elected in 2008 and 2016, do you really think Donald Trump would emerge? No. Donald Trump emerged as a birther. His entry into politics was questioning the very humanity and citizenship of the innovation. Because the innovation, listen, the innovation disturbed the primary power structure. And in response to the innovation, we are now living in the dip. Had it been Al Gore elected, listen, in 2000, Donald Trump was appearing at WrestleMania. Literally, for those of you who are fans, he was literally shaving the head of Vince McMahon, the head of WWE. He just appointed Vince McMahon's wife to his cabinet. That without the introduction of the innovation, there would be no Donald Trump. He could not have emerged. I'll close with this thought. Right before the election, Atlantic Magazine endorsed Hillary Clinton. And if you didn't read it, you should go back and read it. It's very timely now, even more so. And I did not know this, but Atlantic Magazine had been in continuous publication since 1858. And several people started sending me this endorsement of Hillary Clinton, and I was not too excited to read it. I voted for her, and I wrote several articles supporting her. But like a lot of people, I was not like incredibly excited about it. I definitely wanted her to win over Donald Trump. So I clicked on it and I read it, and I realized right away what they were talking about. From 1858 until a couple months ago, Atlantic Magazine had only endorsed 2 presidential candidates. In 1860, they endorsed Abraham Lincoln. And they republished their endorsement. And in essence, they said it was a powerful endorsement. In essence, they said, we believe our nation is about to be split in 2. And we believe there's one person who could save the Union and also possibly end the institution of slavery. And they endorsed Abraham Lincoln, and he won. They then waited. They did not endorse anybody else in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, in the early 1900s, 30s, 40s, 50s. They waited until 1964, and they endorsed another presidential candidate, and they endorsed Lyndon Johnson. And their endorsement of Lyndon Johnson was a very backhanded endorsement. They said in it, like, in essence, we really don't even like this man. But you have to think of the time, but our president was just assassinated. President Kennedy had just been assassinated in 1963, and they said something eerily similar to what they said 103 years prior in their last endorsement. They said, with racial tensions at an all-time high, we believe that this country again could be split in 2, and that electing Lyndon Johnson, that he would continue the principles and values and plans of President Kennedy, and we are endorsing him because we believe that he will also advance civil rights legislation. And indeed he did. In 1965 and 1966, we had the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, the most important legislation of the decade. And so they then said in November, early November, it shook me, and it's what I want to leave you with this, that there were 3 times that we were troubled. The Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, and then right now. Like I started by saying, it's hard to discern a moment in history when you're in it. But listen, that's the Civil War. That's the Civil Rights Movement. And that's where we are right now. That you need to understand the time, because you will live your life in light of the time. I'm not here to tell you specifically what to do, but I'm telling you to live your life in light of the fact that people have looked at all of American history and said there were 3 times that troubled us: the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, and last month. Sometimes it's like, oh wow, I'm living in that. And it has felt like that for a lot of us. And I came here today to give you the context and to tell you, we are in the moment it felt like we were in, like it feels like we are in. But if you don't act like it, if you don't live like it, if you don't make decisions like it, based on everything I know about how human history goes, the dip, instead of lasting for a few years, could last for many, many years. Do not make the mistake of thinking that we will mysteriously, accidentally find our way out of the dip. That is not how dips work. Dips were built on purpose. And we will have to work. Did you see the graphic that I shared? That Democrats in America now only control 4 states. 4. I thought it was fake at first. I literally had to fact check it. It was from the Washington Post. It's the smallest number in the history of America. 4. And they do not control the House, the Senate, or the presidency. It's wild. That is where we live right now. And I'm not saying Democrat equals right or holy. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying wherever we are right now, it was built this way on purpose by people who mean you harm. And the energy and the effort that it will take and the results that we want are serious. I'm here to be your partner. I'm here to walk with you and to stand with you, not only here at the University of Michigan, but here in Michigan and around the country. And as you continue to take bold steps, I have your back. I care about you. I love you. I appreciate you. God bless you. Take care, everybody.
So Shaun said that he didn't want to inspire anybody, but I feel like there's a lot of folks in here who are inspired. You know, one more time. Okay, I was asked to close the event. I'm going to try to keep these remarks extremely short because people want to leave. People want to have the selfie party. I don't want to stand in between that. You know, I want to make sure I can get home safe. But when folks got together to organize this event, right, like part of it was, you know, you want to not only inspire folks, but this should be an opportunity for folks to like see this as a launch pad towards doing other work on campus, in your communities, you know, at the State House, right? So think about this, right, as like sort of like a mass meeting, you know, during the like civil rights movements where folks were getting together, getting inspired, but then you use this as an opportunity to not only fortify your own belief, you know, your own sort of commitment to justice, but to try to make connections with one another. So I'm sure there's some organizers in here. There's some activists in here. You know, as you're walking out, if you're not going to stay for the selfie party, if you're sitting, or if you're standing in line, or if you're walking out, you know, try to make connections. Try to, you know, find ways to get involved. You know, like that's the best way. You know, is just find someone who you know is involved. Ask them how, and they might help direct you. You know, you can, you know, follow Shaun's Injustice Boycott. It's another good way nationally. You can follow student groups like Students for Justice at the University of Michigan. You know, there are folks who are working on an assortment of issues, like, and I wish I had like the encyclopedia in my head, but I really don't. So it's like, again, you need to ask people. But, you know, and moving out, right, like think about the ways in which you can get involved in state politics, because as Shaun said, right, like, I mean, it's basically one party rule throughout the country. You know, follow up on the Women's March on Washington. You know, organize your own groups, you know, try to find ways to get involved in issues. And, you know, just think about, it's going to be a long 4 years. It's going to be you know, for many of us, like who try to do this for the duration of our lives, this is a long distance run. You're not going to achieve any sort of your goals that you want, you know, just overnight, in a month, right, in a year. And as Shaun just described, you know, history does not run, you know, in a progressive line upwards. So it's like you got to find ways in which to stay involved, you know, keep your compass, you know, set on justice, set on solidarity, try to find ways to build connections with other folks, get involved in issues that you're not typically involved in while leading on your own issues, because you're going to need a lot of solidarity over the next 4 years. And you need solidarity. You need solidarity to build capacity, to build power, and that's the only way you can enact justice. But when you're doing this, you always got to try to be democratic, like Ella Baker. So we're going to go ahead and move forward to the selfie party. We need folks you can only come up this way. I'm going to be at this set of stairs, and I'm going to let folks come onto the stage. And then after you take your selfies, exit to my left and your right. Thanks, everybody.
Hi.